Hi and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. Today I'm joined by Lindsay Ejoh, a fifth-year student in a research-focused PhD program in neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studies neural circuits underlying pain and pain relief, with special interest in endorphins. She is very passionate about increasing underrepresented minority representation in STEM and using her skills to communicate science to the general public. Welcome, Lindsay. Tell us about your research and what all you're doing.
So, like you mentioned, I'm a fifth year PhD student. I'm in a neuroscience program, and my lab studies pain. My project is really interested in how the brain encodes the conscious experience of pain and how it can therefore also relieve pain. So, I'm interested in a specific brain area called the thalamus, which is what you would call like a gate that sends pain information and all your really a lot of different sensory information to the brain to like bring it to your consciousness. And I'm interested in how that brain area encodes pain, and then of course how we can reduce that in people with chronic pain. So I study mice, and we do that because they're similar enough to humans in how they process this very basic sensation, pain. Many organisms need pain to survive, even though it's very, very problematic in a lot of people's lives. It is a signal that is like evolutionary beneficial. It helps us stay away from things that are harmful and things like that. We're interested in how this, like I said, the thalamus is encoding pain with special interest in opioids. You may know opioid drugs like morphine or even like naturally made opioids like endorphins can actually shut down pain neurons in the brain and block those pain signals from reaching your consciousness. So we're seeing if we can like hijack that system in order to like create therapies for people with chronic pain.
So you're seeing if you can use the endogenous endorphins to provide relief for chronic pain sufferers. That's really interesting because there's a lot of, I don't know if you've heard of this research about pain perception. I've heard of a lot of people going to their doctor to get pain medicine, and there's like kind of two separate issues. There's one issue of some of the pain medicine is really addictive, so it's really dangerous to prescribe it. But then the other issue is doctors not believing that their patients are actually experiencing pain. So, like, if you could find a biomarker of pain in the thalamus or something, that would be really interesting. But another thing you said that on your Instagram that I thought was really interesting was it World War II where the guy gave saline solution instead of morphine to his soldiers and they actually reported feeling pain relief? So, how do you think that your work can feed into this discussion on pain and pain treatment?
Well, very loaded question. I would say like for the thing about the person who gave his soldiers saline instead of morphine, 50% of those soldiers reported pain relief from that. It wasn't everyone because they experienced the placebo effect, which actually is a real biological process that happens where the expectation of pain relief can cause a natural release of these pain relieving molecules, some of which are endorphins and natural opioids. Part of my PhD project is actually trying to trick mice into relieving their own pain through placebo and expectation. So we teach them, and you can watch that YouTube video that I linked in that you're referring to right now for like more information about how we do this. But we pretty much trick mice into expecting pain in some environment and expecting pain relief in a different environment. And we find that when they expect pain relief, that actually some of these mice will release these opioids and actually reduce their pain. And then we want to see if we can harness this in the mice. So yeah, that's how it kind of fits in, but it's difficult. It's like a long, long, long journey to find a biomarker for pain. Right now, there's no perfect biomarker for pain, especially because everyone's chronic pain is different. Everybody's unique experience or everybody's experience with chronic pain is very unique and it's caused by different things. Even if people with back pain in the same exact spot might have completely different causes for what the back pain is. And of course, the people with the same exact like feeling of back pain might have completely different brain chemistry too. Pain and addiction are entangled, especially in the context of opioids. So yeah, it's definitely like a field with a lot of open questions for sure.
A lot of open questions with a lot of relevance for society. We learned this in grad school, back when I was a graduate student. When you have an opioid overdose, you can take Narcan and it will immediately reverse it via like, this like very simple mechanism of like just like crowding out the, I don't remember exactly how it works, but it's like very fast and life-saving, and without it you die. There's so much talk about the opioid epidemic, which I know people that have died from that. It's hard to know like what part of these research translates to the real world. Like from your research, there may be some benefits to like people that are like in a clinic and they're trying to figure out how to reduce their pain. So that's why I wanted to ask you about your SciComm activities, because you also are a science communicator and you did a Instagram video with the Ad Council on like the flu vaccine, which I thought was really cool. So, what cool opportunities in science and SciComm have you had since you started posting on Instagram? I should say also, to me, you are a neuroscience influencer of the neuroscience world. And I don't think I've ever met a neuroscience influencer before. That's why I was really excited to chat with you. So, tell us about all of your work as a science communicator and influencer.
I'm really happy to. I do want to jump back to a previous point you were making about Narcan, just to clarify like how that works. So Narcan is an antagonist for the opioid receptor. So, like you were saying, molecules will bind opioid receptors. These are these proteins that hang out outside your cells, waiting to like sense things in the environment. So they'll bind them, and then that can lead the cell to do a lot of things. For example, like shut down, and a lot of cells can't really afford to shut down, like the muscles that help you breathe. And so the opioid antagonist, this drug like Narcan, comes in and, like you said, knocks the opioids off of the receptors, and it just sits there and blocks the opioids action from, further inhibiting those cells. And that is actually what like reverses these harmful effects of the opioid overdose. I can talk a little bit more about my SciComm as well. So, I mean, I started making videos for fun, like in the middle of grad school. I thought it would be cool to do like day in the life videos because I saw people doing it on the internet, and they actually had a lot of traction. So I continued it, and that has led to a lot of different opportunities to spread the word about science, teach people about the brain. I think it's very fun. And I also think it's very, very important, especially in a time where public trust in science is decreasing. All these different things where people are looking at scientists like, I don't know if I'm really buying what you're saying. And then, of course, like anti intellectualism. So there's a lot of reason to have scientists that are at the bench doing the work, reading the papers, take some of their time to translate their science and translate science in general to the general public in a way that people can understand. And I do it on social media because I think it's nice to meet people where they are.
When I was in grad school, I consumed a lot of like influencer content, a lot of style bloggers, and I was like, why don't we have anyone like that in neuroscience that does this kind of stuff? Because we do really cool things, and because it just really made me feel like an outsider to the world to see all these like stylish people writing about how stylish they are, and like none of them were scientists. So that's why I feel seen in a way from your Instagram, but also you're a really huge proponent of representation in STEM. Have you found with your Instagram that people reach out to you and they're like, thanks for being my role model, like I applied to a PhD program because of you and stuff like that?
Yeah, I get messages like several of those a week. It's really nice. It's like really affirming, especially because the PhD process is like, it's really hard. It's very rough, and it can be sad and stressful. So to have a community of people who gets it and has like solid, usable advice for you, and then also like go through similar things and you can help them. Like I've gotten a lot of peer mentoring out of it that I did not expect, but has been really fulfilling. And then of course it's lovely to provide this representation and show people that like, because I feel like even like the STEM tab on TikTok, or like most STEM influencers, especially as somebody who's in the space, the people with the most followers are not people of color. It's frustrating, but it's nice to provide that representation for people who are like, I have no idea what this field is about, but I'm really interested in, I don't know, dedicating my life to like helping cure Alzheimer's or helping the research in vision and things like that, where they can see it and they can see people doing it, but they don't see people who look like them. So it becomes that much less attainable for them in their heads. So it's nice to provide that.
Having role models is important. I love your posts because they are so like relatable, and that's great that you're inspiring lots of people to get into science that haven't really traditionally been included in this science discussion, because there's so many barriers to apply to graduate school. I think I paid like thousands of dollars over time to like apply to different programs, but now it's even more selective. Like I hear of people applying to tons and tons of programs and not even getting in. So there's a lot of unspoken rules in grad school. And like you just posted some stuff on how to get into graduate school on your Instagram, which is really nice that you help people with that. So, what other positive effects have you seen from having an Instagram as a scientist?
I think it's being able to connect with people who are experiencing chronic pain. Like I'm reading and thinking and researching chronic pain every day. And I have chronic pain too. I have like IBS and some shoulder pain. But like it's a different experience to hear over and over again from different people who live with chronic pain every day, what kind of things they prioritize, what kind of questions they have about pain in general, and kind of just being in community with them is really nice. I didn't expect that. A lot of scientists are siloed. They don't communicate with people who are affected by the conditions that they're studying. We're not incentivized to. We're incentivized to be in the lab and read, not to really be in the field, in the clinic, and things like that, unless you do clinical research. So it's given a lot of like really really good perspective to me as a scientist, especially the way I like approach different questions or even the way I would communicate the science I do study.
That's so important because I used to do PTSD research, and it wasn't until I gave a talk, and at the end of the talk, this veteran walked up to me and was like, PTSD isn't really like that, and I was like, okay, well, I've just been studying this for 5 years, so I guess I didn't study the right thing. But then 10 years later, I was volunteering at the Veterans Hospital here in Oklahoma. And I met some veterans that actually, some of them suffered with chronic pain, some of them had PTSD, a lot of them were struggling with addiction. And talking to them really helped me learn more about like the aspects of their disease that you don't write about on paper, like just like their day-to-day lives and like what a person that actually has PTSD would like look like. And I've also met a lot of people that have been diagnosed with PTSD that I know personally, and it's been a really interesting conversation because like my one friend, I was telling them about how I know all this stuff about alcoholism, and they're in recovery, and they were like, "Oh wow, that must be really useful in your conversations with alcoholics." And I was like, "I've never thought about it that way before, but yes." So I really think that like more people should be on Instagram, or at least talking about their work with people and engaging with this community like you have. What are your thoughts on the role of science communication in science? Do you think that there's a role for this type of work like in the graduate program, like in a training program or even undergraduate program?
I mean, I think that all scientists should be trained on how to communicate their science across different levels. I think that only being able to communicate to subject matter experts is not very impressive or even useful. I mean, it's useful when you're talking to other experts, but what about the other neuroscience? For example, I'm studying chronic pain neuroscience, right? What about the other neuroscientists that don't think about pain, but study other disorders that involve pain, that can't really understand all the jargon I'm saying, but they would really need to know that when conducting their research, or other biologists that study human health or animal health and things like that, that pain is super relevant to a lot of different fields. And then also people stepping out of scientists in general, it's just really important to be able to communicate across levels so we can share our ideas and share our knowledge. We're doing all this discovering, but then we're keeping the information to ourselves, and that's not as productive as it could have been if we've shared it with as much people as we could. So I think that there's definitely a place in like scientific training at the undergraduate level. I mean, I took like a presentations class, like a scientific talking course as an undergraduate. I took it just because it was one of the easy electives, but I didn't realize how useful that information was going to be for me. And I think it should have been a mandatory course, honestly, for my field or for my major. There's also like opportunities for graduate students to communicate their work, but it's not really embedded in their training. The only like training embedded science communication is when you're talking, like when you're writing grants or writing papers. Like there's really not that much else opportunities or incentives to engage in science communication. It's more like an extracurricular thing, kind of like DEI, where like these like, really important foundational work that will help drive science forward is not very prioritized by even scientists themselves, because a lot of it is like focus on the work, get the research done, mostly because that's where the money is, but also like, there's definitely room for the system to change in that way.
So, how do you hope to carry this work forward as a postdoc and professor? Do you plan to have an Instagram as a professor? I was wondering about this. Like, I was like, I love your Instagram. I wonder if you'll still do it when you're in your postdoc. Are you planning to remain on IG and TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to continue science communication for like, I want to say forever, but I'm going to keep going until the wheels fall off. I plan on expanding to when I'm no longer a PhD student. I don't know if I'll have more time, but I'll definitely have more freedom to expand in certain ways that I can't necessarily do as a student, especially because the pursuit of the degree is. But I do plan to stay on as a professor. I don't know what that'll look like for me because there's not that much precedent for it in my field or really in science in general. But I do see science communicators going out, giving talks. Like, I do want to be like that. Maybe even like start a podcast or like a YouTube channel and all the things. Maybe like hiring people and creating a team, getting animators. And my goal is to do it myself and then outsource, but still like have this science communication platform that I will continue into the future. I definitely don't want to let it go just because I'm a professor. And I don't think I'm going to pursue professor position if it's impossible for me to continue science communication. No way. I can be both because I have a lot of energy. I don't know if you can tell. I have a lot of energy, so I can make anything happen, honestly. That's how I feel.
There's some people that now study only SciComm, like Fenwell Mundi at Civic Sci TV. He has a whole YouTube channel. He's a professor of practice of just SciComm. Increasingly, SciComm is becoming a part of science. Scientists get into SciComm more. You mentioned diversity in STEM, which is really important. Science communication, where we get outside of our fields and our small niches and talk to other scientists and also to members of the public, is really important for that. Firstly, to make sure that science is truly representative of the problems that people face, but also just to make sure that everyone's in conversation with science. So, have you found that communicating science has helped with, I don't want to say DEI because I feel like that's the acronym that has fallen out of favor with our politicians right now, but like it's definitely very clear that we definitely have to keep getting more people into science and have a diversity of perspectives. And do you think that in the absence of DEI programs, SciComm can help do that more organically than like, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think that SciComm can exist without DEI either. The same people who have had their communities particularly targeted by scientists and researched and experimented on and not compensated or even lied to are not going to look at a team of white male psychommers and be like, oh, this fixes the problem. Like, I wouldn't pay attention to them either. So I don't think SciComm can stand in for DEI. I think that both of them are important to supplement good science. I mean, if you think about it, like any of the viewers watching this, do you want the person that's researching how to solve your grandmother's chronic illness or your personal chronic pain be somebody who's only studying wealthy white male people and not expanding their participant group to other communities? Somebody who doesn't really consider socioeconomic and racial factors and how the world plays out when they're studying how the world works. Like, it doesn't really make sense to not involve like social justice or even like how social sciences when studying science when your goal is to further and better society. It just doesn't work. We can try as much as we want and spend millions of dollars, but it's just not going to do what we want it to do.
I'm really shocked that suddenly diversity is actually a very large umbrella that includes sexism as well as racism. And it's just like, I feel that sometimes I read, like when I read the news, I feel like we're going backwards. And so I'm like, well, if DEI, quote unquote DEI, isn't the solution, then is there a solution that isn't this acronym that still does the same thing? And I think for me, the solution has been to just say that these people that want to keep science not diverse and toxic also they just don't know what they're talking about because there's so many women in science, a lot of people in science that are, you hear way too many stories of people having horror stories, being marginalized, leaving their programs. And yeah, it's been really difficult to try to reconcile, like the fact that Elon Musk wants to defund studying racism in neuroscience, like biomarkers of racism or something. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter.
I do not participate on, on Twitter at all anymore. Like, I just think scientists and academics in general have really lost the plot. I think the way science and research is so closely entangled with capitalism, it de-incentivizes people to do things that are good for science. Like, so for example, imagine you are a fifth year graduate student and you're running out of money for your funding, and you have collected participants for your groundbreaking research study, but many of them are like rich white college students. And you know that if you spent another certain amount of money or certain amount of time, you could go out of your way to recruit people that are not in those groups, like, and diversify your research sample and really, really like be able to run these comparisons and be able to really dissect how these systems affect the work you're doing. Would you rather stay in a lab that is like toxic and that you're running out of money in, and you don't want to be there anymore and you're burning out because they're overworking you? Or are you going to take this extra step to like stay in this environment but like do this good work for the people? There's so many different situations that are like similar to this, where choosing to do the right thing is not the easiest choice, and the system sets it up where like it's really not the best way. Or somebody who like their family is struggling and they need help, but they're a PhD student still, they need to graduate, they need to make more than 34K a year. Like, it's just not sustainable. Imagine all the people out there with all this potential and all these ideas that are just not even being brought to the table. I mean, you said that it takes thousands of dollars to apply to grad school. It takes so many thousands of dollars because you got to pay for undergrad if you don't get a scholarship. You have to do unpaid internships. Except for my summer ones, all the work I did in research in undergrad, all these different labs was completely unpaid. And I was only able to do that because my parents could pay my rent. What if my parents couldn't pay my rent? You guys would not know me right now. I would not be in this field. There's all these like situations where like people are just being blocked at the door, and it's not just race, it's money. It's all of these different isms and all this stuff. I just think everyone has lost the plot. Everyone is focused more on ego and money than they are on discovery, science, curing, research, finding out new knowledge about the universe, supporting people who are wanting to find out more knowledge about the world. How are we going to make the world better if we're not even doing the discovery part correct? You know?
Yeah, that's the big question that I think is really important. On one level, science as I know it is all about the usually very old, usually white, usually male guy that everyone loves, that has all the publications. And now that I've left science, I don't know who those people are. And I just published a review, and it was weird because I don't know who those people are anymore. And that's not to say that I don't love those people and I don't think they do good science, but it's so hard for anyone that just isn't like fitting that mold to make it in science. And it's due to a lot of different reasons. It's due to society's expectations of what a scientist should look like. It's due to science's expectations of what a scientist looks like. And it's also due to all the things you mentioned, like not having money to go to graduate school. My parents had to help me with my rent in graduate school as well. And that honestly sucked because Washington, D.C. is a very expensive place to live. But there's a lot of people that graduate school would not even be a path for them, and they have a lot of good ideas. And I really think that we could be doing a better job of lifting up those people and striving to go the extra mile to make science more diverse because society's getting more diverse anyway. So I don't know if you've heard of the field of science. It's like a field where you can introspect on science and the way the science is done. For example, I saw a study about men in science and how they use paternity leave versus women in science and how they use maternity leave. And women in science use maternity leave to take time off to take care of their kids, but men in science can often use the paternity leave to work more. So then at the end of their time off, because they had a kid, the men are more successful than the women. And there's the famous NIH study about the grant funding that doesn't fund Black researchers as much as it funds like white researchers and like all this stuff. And those are all signs of science.
Crazy thing about that is these grants will like discriminate and not fund Black researchers as much. So then they created grant mechanisms that can help fund more diverse candidates and get more Black people in science. And then most of the people who get those diversity grants, because they'll expand diversity to include all this other socioeconomic and all these different first gen, which is really important, right? Too, but like these grants that are made to get more black people and people of color in the door will like mostly be given to people who are not Black, and then the people who are Black in those grants are told, "Oh, you just got that grant because you're Black." Anyway, that's just side note, annoying.
10 years ago, when I was in grad school, I left my graduate program because my funding ran out. So I like to think that that event is a byproduct of this culture in academia also. It's so fun and cool to be a scientist, and I really feel that everyone should be able to do science and appreciate science because it's really amazing to discover like truths and stuff. And that's why I love your Instagram because you're doing that every day and doing brain surgery, which is really cool. But yeah, we definitely have to continue reflecting on what we're really doing and like what are our real goals. And like you said, our real goals are not just to continue this system that we have. So then my last question for you, I am just wondering, how are you able to do those brain surgeries? Do you have a really steady hand, or do you have like a secret of like not drinking coffee? Because I was watching your Instagram yesterday and I'll link it in the description box, and I was just like, I don't know, because the brains you work on are like tiny. How do you do your brain surgeries?
So one, I don't drink coffee, even though I have a lot of energy. I it's all like natural. I drink coffee in emergencies, like in situations where if I'm asleep, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble. So most times I'm like steadier. There's people in my lab that do surgeries and they still have shaky hands. So what we do is it's a mouse brain, so that's why they're so small. And the goal is to pretty much inject a substance in a particular part of the brain so that you can like manipulate the neurons and the brain cells in that area. And if you can manipulate the brain cells and their activity, you can manipulate the behavior of the mouse and what it's perceiving, like how much pain it can perceive and things like that. So the way we do that is we want the animal to be as still and level as possible. So once you get the head to just pretty much be like extremely level with the floor, like to a millimeter level, and we do those measurements as we do it, you can follow the natural sutures in the skull. So the skull comes together in sutures, and you, if you were to look up brain skull sutures, you can see these jagged lines going across the skull that form naturally during development. And we can use those as like a coordinate system, like a map. And we can say, okay, if we start at the top of these two sutures and we go this many millimeters back and right and down, we're going to be right at the amygdala or right in the hippocampus or something. And then you can manipulate the cells and stuff like that. So like we're not in there with tools. We're more like using like a needle and injecting the substance. So all you have to do is like get to the right part of the coordinate map, which it's important to have a steady hand, but you don't need surprisingly that much of a steady hand for. But it's still cool. It's still fun. Definitely can be frustrating, and of course, it's like a sensitive procedure. Like the animals are literally going through surgery. They're gonna wake up after. They're gonna heal and continue behaving and living. So we definitely want to like not cause the animal to suffer in any way. We want them to be like as comfortable as possible. We give them pain medication right after, things like that. And for several days after, we give them pain medication. But it's funny because like the mice are so resilient. They'll like wake up from literal brain surgery and start fighting each other within 10 minutes. So it's like, why are you fighting? You the brains aren't open because we sew them back together, but like you have an active wound. Like calm down.
That's so wow. That's cool that you don't have to do too much like actual like moving your hand very slowly and everything. I'm sure that if you have like a computer thing where you can just plug in some coordinates and stuff, that would probably make it a lot easier.
Yeah, they also have robot versions of what I just described for sure. They're more expensive though.
Yeah, I feel like we never got to do the like fancy expensive things because there's no money for that usually. I don't know who uses those, maybe like companies or something. But it's been really great chatting with you today. Is there anything you want to mention that we didn't talk about, or anything cool you're working on, or anything?
I mean, the number was 1 in 5. It's now 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people live with chronic pain. It's a really important issue. Pain is often thought of as a symptom of diseases and not it's a disease in itself. And the research shows that chronic pain, and many times, for example, if you have like chronic lower back pain, like the lower back sensing part of your brain isn't even as active as like the emotional part of your brain, like this area that is like you were mentioning PTSD earlier, like these similar kind of circuits where chronic pain becomes this like horrible cycle where you're worried about the pain and the pain gets worse and the anxiety makes it worse and all these things where it's like it's actually a huge issue in society, and I just wanted to bring that to the forefront and tell people in the audience that are listening that like there are people out here really working to solve these problems for you. Definitely feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or whatever, TikTok at neuro underscore melody. if you ever want to talk to a pain scientist, like, I'm not a doctor, I do not give medical advice, but I do like know a lot of the research of what happens like in general in the brain for pain. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And thank you for having me on your show. It's been really nice talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really great chatting with you, and I learned a lot about pain that actually, even though I studied PTSD and still study independently, I didn't realize that link between pain and PTSD. So that's another thing I'm writing a paper right now and I have to think about that. So thanks for that. And thank you for your time. I know you're like super busy. I'm such a huge fan of your Instagram, and I hope everyone goes and checks out your Instagram and thinks about everything that we talked about today. I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much.